Hello, everyone. Let's try to take our seats so we can get started. There's Aaron. Well, good afternoon, and welcome to the June 15th meeting of the FCC's Diversity Advisory Committee. I want to thank everyone for coming today. We have two very informative special presentations for the group today, and I want to extend my thanks and appreciation to the two members who helped us put that together, Tony Cook-Bush and Karen Narasaki. Thank you so much. And also want to extend my thanks and appreciation to our chairman, Henry Rivera, for his support of my efforts trying to pull this meeting together in Barbara's absence while she was on travel. So before I turn it over to our chairman, I would just like to ascertain who is on the phone attending today. Would you identify yourselves and your organization, if any?
Yes, my name is Ray Gutierrez, representing Showtime Networks.
Hi, Ray.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks.
Bob Mendez, Disney ABC.
Bob, thank you.
Lisa Pickram with the RLJ Company.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi.
Anyone else?
Steve Hillard with Council Tree.
Hi, Steve.
Good morning.
We were also expecting Jenny Alonzo. Jenny, are you on the line? Not yet? Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for identifying yourselves. I think we have a quorum. I would ask that those attending by phone, please put your phone on mute so that we won't have any background noise disturbing the proceedings. So I'm going to turn the meeting over now to Chairman Henry Rivera.
Thank you, Jamila. And I just want to thank you so much for stepping in when Barbara was on her very, very well-earned vacation. We certainly don't begrudge her that, and we're glad you were able to get away. But we couldn't have done this without you, Jamila, and so thank you very, very much. Before we get started with the proceedings, I just had a couple of announcements. The first is that one of our members, Charles Warfield of Intercity Broadcasting, is going to be honored by the National Association of Broadcasters for his long-time good work in the radio industry. So congratulations, Charles. We're very, very proud of you. Yeah. In fact, he's playing hooky from the NAB. He's supposed to be at a board meeting there, so but he'd rather be with us, so we're very happy about that. I'd also like to give the floor to Diane, who has brought some special guests with her. Diane Suter.
Thank you, Henry. When we had our meeting in September, you may recall that we brought the Broadcast Leadership Training class for 2010 to witness the meeting and to see the activities of this committee in person. That was 10 months ago, and they have now gone through their 10 months of training and graduated. Today is their last official day. Would you all please stand up? Two of the class are currently owners and looking to expand their holdings, and the rest of the class are hoping to either become owners or to move up into the corporate ranks to higher positions. So diversity is in good hands with the graduates of the Broadcast Leadership Training Program. Just a quick aside, the program, this is the 10th year for it. We have 169 graduates, of which 28 are currently owners, and over 33% of the class has been promoted at least once since they graduated from the program. So we're very pleased about the steps that's taken to help diversity. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, congratulations to all of you, and welcome. We're glad to see you back, and we wish you the very best of luck in all of your future endeavors. Congratulations. And congratulations to you, Diane. You are obviously very proud of him, and justly so.
Thank you.
Now, as you can see, we have place cards here for 3 of our commissioners, and they will be joining us as they are accustomed to do whenever they have a moment in their busy schedule. So when they show up, we'll stop whatever it is that we're doing and yield the floor to them, because they generally have a few words to say to us. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Thomas Reed. Tom, thank you for coming. Tom heads up the Office of Communications Business Opportunity, or OCBO, and as you all may recall, that is the office that the chairman of the commission has charged with helping us to move our items and to get our items before the commission. So, Tom, we're very happy that you're here to give us a status report on your good work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's on, Tom.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jamila. Good afternoon, members of the committee. I just want to report on a few items, and I think I'll start with the best first. OCBO has been working fairly closely with the Office of General Counsel on data issues. I think the most important function of our office and a shared mission of the LGC is to make sure that the agency's decisions are wise and driven by accurate and current data. And one of the issues that this body has put before us is updating the Adirond or disparity studies. So I'm happy to report we've been working hard on that issue, and we are authorized to take a first very important step, and that is we are working now to convene a working group to look at the studies that were done about a decade ago. One of the recommendations that was put before the agency was updating those particular studies. But we're going to take a look at those studies and also convene a working group that's going to address what additional questions and data we need to make sure that we understand the current status in the marketplace. We understand the current state of minority participation in the marketplace and capacity. So we're working on that now. I don't have hard deadlines in terms of when that group is going to be put together, but you know, my push is yesterday. So we'll certainly be keeping this group apprised of our progress as we select members of that working group and select a date. We're going to be working around schedules to convene what we hope to be about a 2 to 3 day forum where they will discuss those very issues and produce a set of recommendations on what studies need to be done going forward. Another progress report on that point, one study that's already been commissioned in the agency's work on the quadrennial review of its media ownership rules is a study that was done a decade ago and will be renewed as part of this effort, and that is what is the link between diverse ownership and diversity of content. So that's already underway. Very shortly, a RFQ, I think, will be issued for that work, and that'll be part of the information that's going to be relevant to the work that we do here. So I think that's the first important issue. Have been working...
Go ahead and interrupt you here.
Sure, go ahead.
As you can see, Commissioner Clyburn's joined us, and I'd like to go ahead and give her the floor. Is that okay with you,
That's
Tom?
perfectly fine.
Okay. So, Commissioner, thank you for joining us. We're so happy to see you, as always, and we'd like to yield the floor to you to give us your thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Commissioner, I didn't mean to be disruptive. I was listening with, I haven't seen Tom in a couple of days, so it was good to, again, good afternoon, everyone. And I appreciate you giving me, again, the opportunity to make a few brief remarks. I am, as always, I've expressed this a number of times, appreciative of all of the work that this committee does to help this agency achieve greater diversity in the communications industry. You are all leaders in your respective communications field, and by agreeing to sacrifice your time, and I know it's a sacrifice, from your normal duties in order to serve on this committee, you make a compelling case about the demand for greater diversity in the communications industry. This afternoon, I would like to focus my remarks on another important issue the FCC must effectively resolve in order to promote diversity in the communications industry. When the FCC requires merger applicants to divest spectrum, it must provide better guidance as to how divesting entities can find small businesses, including those owned by members of minority groups, to acquire spectrum licenses through divestiture proceedings. As many of you know, when the FCC reviews merger applications, it sometimes imposes, as a condition to the grant of the merger, the requirement that a new entity divest spectrum and certain communications-related assets in those markets. If the divestiture proceedings are conducted properly, they present terrific opportunities for small businesses, including businesses owned by women and minority members of minority member groups to acquire spectrum and enter the communications space. Recently, there was one divestiture proceeding that was, unfortunately, not a model of how to conduct a divestiture proceeding to promote spectrum ownership by small businesses. This was a divestiture proceeding that Verizon Wireless conducted to comply with the FCC's merger order in the Verizon Wireless Autel proceeding. The properties the Commission ordered Verizon Wireless to divest in November of 2008 are worth billions of dollars and provided a rare and promising opportunity for new entrants and smaller wireless service providers to acquire assets and provide competitive alternatives to larger carriers. A number of parties had asked the Commission to impose conditions requiring a process that would ensure regional, local, or new wireless providers have an opportunity to acquire and divest assets. Instead of imposing such conditions, the Commission chose instead to merely, and I quote, encourage Verizon Wireless to consider and implement mechanisms to assist regional, local, and rural wireless providers, new entrants, and small businesses, and businesses owned by minorities or socially disadvantaged groups in acquiring divestiture assets and or assessing spectrum to the extent possible, end quote. Since the U.S. Department of Justice also identified markets where Verizon Wireless had to divest spectrum and properties, DOJ and Verizon entered into a consent decree. But the language in that consent decree suggests Verizon Wireless should seek to divest to only strong business entities with the ability to compete effectively in providing wireless communication services. So the Commission's interest in assisting new entrants, small businesses, and businesses owned by minority groups to acquire divestiture assets appeared to conflict with DOJ's interests. There was no FCC precedent suggesting that Verizon Wireless could approach the Commission with any questions it might have, or that the Commission should monitor the divestiture process to ensure compliance with the goals of its divestiture order. There are a number of small businesses that are complaining that Verizon Wireless improperly rejected their offers. In my view, the Commission should consider providing detailed guidance about those specific steps that divesting entities can take to encourage new entrants, small businesses, and businesses owned by minorities to acquire Commission-ordered divestiture assets. Those steps could include flexibility in divestiture goals and in financing commitment requirements. I have been working with the Chairman's office, Mr. Chairman, on ways that the Commission can coordinate with the Department of Justice to ensure that both federal agencies follow a consistent approach during divestiture proceedings. I would greatly appreciate your insight and help on this issue, and I look forward to any recommendations you may have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Commissioner, and those are wonderful sentiments and great words, and we very much appreciate your looking out for our communities. Thank you very much. Thomas, those are two very good pieces of very good news you gave us. So we're very pleased to hear about that. Would you mind going ahead and picking up the thread here?
Sure. And obviously, I will always cede the floor to Commissioner Clyburn, so I have no problem there. A couple other issues that we're working on and have been working on with the Media Issues Subcommittee and having to do with our website, information that will be provided to our clients, our constituents, through our website. And just to give you an update on that, we're working with the new media team as it's revitalizing the agency's website overall. That process is taking a little bit of time, but we're working with that team as we develop the content that we want to go on our website, some of that being intelligence on access to capital and capitalization strategies. Other issues that are related to proposals by having to do with what we've termed a diversity guide, and that information will be on our website as well. Information about spectrum auctions, information about that, information, again, about access to capital, and information having to do with purchasing broadcast properties, and other information that's useful to our constituents groups. We're in the process of designing our website, and we're coordinating with a new media team. That may take a few months before they launch the new website for the agency, and simultaneous with that will be a lot of our new website as well. David.
Mr. Reed, in September 2009, this committee voted to recommend that 7 Adirond studies be performed. What do you think realistically is the timeline for when the Commission will have those studies under review, funded, initiated, and completed?
You know, as I said, I mean, the first step is going to be looking at those. I think the recommendation was to update the 7 studies that were originally done, or the 6 studies that were originally done in '99 and 2000. The working group that we're putting together is going to look at the initial question, and that is, would updating those 6 studies be sufficient? That's the first question they're going to look at, and then they're going to look at, and I expect that they will find that additional information will be needed and additional studies will need to be done in assessing the cost. I can't give you a timeline as to when that will happen. I think we're going to take this a step at a time, and we're going to probably convene this group as quickly as possible so that we can get the recommendations that will come from this group. And obviously we will be in touch with the committee as to the next steps going forward, as to how long it's going to take to put out RFQs for those studies, how we're going to do that, how long it's going to take, and requisitioning the funds to do so. Other than that, I think you all are well aware of the work that our office is doing, coordinating the public-private partnership, SBA SCORE. SCORE is the Service Corps of Retired Executives. OCBO's role in helping to coordinate that effort. Well, for those of you who don't know, as part of the National Broadband Plan, one of the recommendations that was put in place that's already been launched is to put this public-private partnership in place to help fund SCORE. SCORE, being a resource partner of the Small Business Administration, specializes in training aspiring entrepreneurs in business plan and strategy. They are incorporating in their work broadband training, adoption, and utilization for small businesses. The role that we've undertaken is making sure that that effort is scaled and tailored for minority and women-owned businesses. And so we are reaching out to minority business and women business chambers and other organizations to be a part of the effort, to be education partners in that effort, making sure that SCORE's training materials, which they anticipate will be released in the fall, and they're going to start to do training sessions in the first quarter of 2011. We want to make sure that the message is out to all the minority chambers and minority business associations, so that they're part of that effort and they can consult with us as we go forward to make sure that their membership is aware of the training opportunity. So, and I think one last announcement, which you all may be aware of, there was a public notice a couple of weeks ago directly related to a proposal from this committee to create a joint Native Nations FCC Broadband Task Force. The CGB, the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, has established the FCC Native Nations Broadband Task Force, implementing the recommendation to do so. And the task force will be responsible for assisting in developing and executing a commission consultative policy eliciting input from Native American governments, ensuring that Native American concerns are considered in all commission proceedings related to broadband, and coordinating with external entities, including other federal departments and agencies. The task force will be comprised of senior FCC staff and tribal leaders or their designees. So that was directly related to a recommendation by this committee.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All very positive. Any questions for Tom? Any other questions for Tom? Okay.
I did have a question, which is, I think that first I want to say thank you because it was the Broadband Committee that made the recommendation and that you're implementing on the Native Task Force, and we're very pleased to hear that. But I do think that our subcommittee would also be interested in having a report on the other recommendations. I think that's something that, as a general matter, at least my subcommittee has expressed interest in knowing what the status of the other recommendations that the Diversity Committee has made, and specifically the Broadband Subcommittee.
Okay.
Tom, we appreciate very much that you've been working actively with the Media Issues Subcommittee on the relaunch of the FCC site. We had provided some examples and a proposed outline on those things that might be included as it relates to investment and to acquiring funding. Do you have any feedback for us in terms of how we might continue to work with you? What would you be looking for from us? Because we have made a point of trying to offer the resources, and some of the things that you may be seeking will need to actually go out and get created, which we can do for you, but we would like to know how we can best work with you going forward.
No, I'm glad you recommend that. I think we can probably talk offline about how best to do that. I thought the outline and the materials that you provided were right along the line of what we're looking for. Most of those were on the capital access issue, and we're going to be looking for more materials. So to the extent that your subcommittee is able and willing to help with that, we certainly can meet going forward to discuss that.
I think the more time we can have to put materials together and to get you specifically what you're looking for, the better we can respond to your needs, so that when you do launch, you've got a complete package up there that's useful for those interested in getting that information.
Absolutely. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to add my thanks. It's good to see you've been on some of the recommendations that we've been making. On the Adirond Task Force, are you going to be working with other agencies like the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice?
We may well be. I mean, right now the effort is centered with OCBO and OGC internally. I have had conversations with DOJ and DOJ personnel that work specifically on the issue of Adirond studies and making sure that government initiatives are well supported. So right now, the initial step will be internal, but as needed, we do consult DOJ.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions? Well, Tom, you heard from all three of the subcommittee chairs in a totally spontaneous way. It was totally unplanned. But I think there is, I think it's fair to say that there is a modest amount of frustration in the committee about the fact that there doesn't seem to be a lot of progress. Obviously, some of the things you reported today, that certainly is some progress. But I guess we'd like to see some more. And,
sure.
I know that's not.
We are aligned in that, yes.
Yes, and you are in many respects the messenger. But if you could take a message to the right place here in terms of the fact that we need to get moving on some of these recommendations, I think all of us would be a lot happier.
Sure.
So again, thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome.
We appreciate it. All right, and before I forget, Tony, I was wondering if you could take the commissioners' ideas here and run them around your committee and see if maybe you could come up with some ideas.
Yes,
She's
we'd be
got
happy to do that.
She's got some notes, and
Right.
perhaps you could get those from her staff.
Yeah.
So we don't want to forget that. All right, let's move on to the working group recommendations. And Diane, you're up on the media issues.
Thank you, Henry. You have before you both a report from the PPM task force and also a new task force that I'd like to bring to this committee. First, as it relates to the PPM task force, you may recall that in December, this body agreed and voted to request the commission to institute a 403 investigation as it related to PPM. As an update, since that time, there has been an agreement reached between Arbitron, the PPM coalition. That release is attached in here for you to see. And as such, the committee would like to ask that the full committee withdraw its December 3rd, 2009 recommendation for the institution of that Section 403 investigation, and instead would like to recommend that the FCC's Office of Communication Business Opportunities, yes, Tom, yet another one for you, monitor the progress between Arbitron, the Media Ratings Council, and the PPM Coalition for compliance with the settlement agreement that the Office of CBO periodically confer with the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee in order to provide updated reports to the Commission.
Thank you, Diane. Okay, the chair will take that as a motion. Is there a second? There needs to be a second. Second, all right. Is there any discussion on that? Just by way of background, this committee, the previous iteration of this committee, also recommended a 403 investigation, and that was in July of 2009. Is that right, Barbara? Something like that. Yeah. So this is the second time this committee has recommended the 403 investigation, and now the committee is recommending that we withdraw that recommendation. So, Karen.
Yes, I'm excited to see the announcement. I haven't seen, though, the content of what's actually been agreed upon, and, you know.
There's a fair amount of it that I think hopefully you can take from the press release, which gives some background on it, and we actually do have members of the coalition, but I think that this release really covers the most amount we could talk about on that regard.
Right. I did read the release, and so that was actually my question, is how much is public? Because, well, the Asian community wasn't part of the task force that apparently has the agreement, so we had raised concerns earlier on about Arbitron and the extent to which they were actually dealing with language issues with their research and trying to do ratings, and I just don't know whether what's been settled actually covers some of those issues. So I'm interested in knowing that before voting to withdraw.
Well, I'm speaking now in my capacity as counsel to the PPM Coalition and not as a diversity committee member. Yet, and the agreement with the coalition entered into with Arbitron is confidential and hasn't been released, although there were, we did go to great efforts to try to summarize as much as possible what was in there. And Arbitron has indicated, you know, efforts in the focus primarily in the Hispanic language area. We did not have participation by the Asian community in the coalition, and as a result, I think that impeded our ability to focus on that issue. But I'm happy to have a conversation with Arbitron, and if you'd like, have a conversation with you offline about this. But it's not appropriate for us to discuss beyond what's in the press release.
Other questions, comments? Are you ready to vote? All right, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Nay. Nay? The ayes have it. Thank you. Diane?
The second thing I'd like to bring before the committee is that the Media Issues Subcommittee felt the group brought a new issue which required us to create a new task force, and that is on performance royalty. And since this last meeting, a new task force has been formed on performance royalty to look at the impact that it may have on diversity, since that it is being considered in both the House and the Senate. And really our considering it is the idea that the Commission is really the expert agency on communications, and as such, we would be looking at it to determine what, if any, the legislation's impact might have on the Commission's ability to carry out its duties. And at this present time, we are reviewing that and going through that, and we'll come back to this body when we have specific recommendations to make. But I did want to make everyone aware that we had formed this additional task force.
Thank you, Diane. So nothing for us to vote on at this time?
No.
All right. Any questions of Diane on this new task force? No? All right. Thank you, Diane. David, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There have been 3 recommendations that the Diversity Committee has adopted in the last couple of years on the subject of full file review and the Adarand studies. The first one was a fairly comprehensive report and recommendation to create full file review that was adopted unanimously by the committee October 22, 2008. On September 11, 2009, recommendations to do the 7 Adirond studies and a further recommendation on some of the administrative issues and also on how to handle tribal lands for the purpose of full file review. Those recommendations were also adopted by the full committee. Subsequently, the Office of General Counsel posed to us 5 questions, which are essentially legal issues that the subcommittee considered and realized were beyond the expertise of any of our members. We were very fortunate that Covington and Burling has very generously agreed to assist MMTC in particular pro bono in helping to tee up those issues. Their team is here with us today to give a report and to solicit our initial input. It is led by John Blake, who all of us know, one of the very senior distinguished members of our bar, and 2 associates who work with him, Libby Cantor and Jason Davis. John, we're very glad that you're here, and please go forward.
We're glad to be here, and we're honored to try to help out in this important issue. I want to introduce as well Mel Verhane, Kate Doris, and Shelton Davidson, who's behind us, who's been working on this. I think we got an email from David at 11:59 on Saturday night, and we went down as fast as we could, because these are both difficult and important issues. We are going to kind of a status report on the 5 issues that David put to us that came from, I think, a lengthy conversation with the Office of General Counsel at the FCC. We have a status report where we want to lay out an assessment of those 5 issues. Our report will have to be summary in nature because these are very complicated and interrelated issues. We have a lot more to say than we can squeeze into 15 minutes, and we'd be welcome to stay behind and talk with all of you about those, and I think there will probably be further work, and we look forward to that. We'll also lay out briefly some tentative conclusions and possibilities for further steps to go forward. The 5 topics that were teed up by the conversation with the Office of General Counsel are summarized in the list that's being sent around. And we're going to start with one of the most important ones. Libby Cantor is going to address the question of the standard of review that the courts would apply, because in coming up with a program, it's very important to get it right in terms of its withstanding judicial scrutiny. And that's sort of a core issue, and some of the subjects that follow on from that feed into the question of whether we can withstand judicial review in this very controversial and complicated area. So, Libby?
Thank you. It sounds like many of you are very familiar with Adirond, but just as a quick background, at least since 1995, it's been clear that racial classifications, even benign affirmative action programs, are subject to strict scrutiny, which requires a showing that a program is narrowly tailored to serve a compelling governmental interest. And that's a very, very difficult standard to survive, even though Adirond took pains to point out that the test was not fatal in fact, which is all background for the first question, which is whether it's possible to design a full file review program that's subject to rational basis review rather than strict scrutiny. Our initial conclusion is that it should be possible to structure a full file review program so that it's race neutral and subject to rational basis, but there are several considerations that trigger strict scrutiny, which we should be very careful to avoid, and some of which present challenges. There are some obvious types of racial classifications. So for example, a government agency can't explicitly consider an applicant's race, even among other factors, in determining which entities are to be awarded a benefit. And agencies can't impose quotas or soft hiring goals or soft goals of other types. But as presently conceived, full file review likely avoids these problems or could be designed to avoid these problems. There are 2 far more challenging considerations, however. The first is that courts may look at whether or not an agency was motivated by racial purpose or unexplainable on grounds other than race. the Supreme Court cases addressing this issue have mostly involved redistricting, but lower courts, including the D.C. Circuit, have examined the government's intent and motivation in the affirmative action context, including some decisions arising from FCC actions. Courts do seem to be drawing a very fine distinction between programs that are motivated by racial preference versus ones that have simply considered a rule's effect on minorities and women. This is a very fine line, which emphasizes that this is a pretty unsettled area of law. And there are good arguments that subjective intent, at least the Supreme Court wouldn't find subjective intent to be dispositive. In particular, Justice O'Connor and Justice Scalia in various concurrences and opinions have used rhetoric that at least contemplated that government actors could seek to increase minority business participation so long as they did it in a race-neutral way. However, it's important that the language we use to discuss full file review, that we're careful in the language we use to discuss full file review, given the possibility that subjective intent might matter in a later court challenge. The second consideration that we ought to be careful about is that courts might look to whether or not we're using race to create a presumption of disadvantage. So for example, the Adarand case we've discussed subjected to strict scrutiny a program that looks a little bit like the proposed full file review. The program encouraged government contractors to hire subcontractors that were controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. And the problem there wasn't that test so much, but that members of minority groups were entitled to a rebuttable presumption of disadvantage. And the court held that the race-based rebuttable presumption used in the program was not race neutral and was thus subject to strict scrutiny. So to avoid strict scrutiny, full file review can explicitly create a presumption or operate to create a presumption in a way that has a presumption that members of minority groups are disadvantaged and thus entitled to be considered eligible entities. And that point is important as the committee and the commission design a program and develop metrics for the program. For example, one important question is, if experience as a racial minority or as a woman is not itself presumed sufficient, what types of racial experiences are properly considered eligible and which are not? And that's something to think about. And I'll back up really quickly and just say that I've been talking about sort of racial minorities versus women because racial groups are looked at under strict scrutiny, which is a harder test to withstand than gender, which is evaluated, gender classifications are evaluated under intermediate scrutiny. So presumably something that's sufficient to withstand strict scrutiny will also withstand intermediate scrutiny. So while the considerations I've outlined may present some challenges, we do think it's possible to design a race-neutral full file review program. Of course, a race-neutral program may have less of an effect on the number of successful women and minority applicants. So while I started out by saying that it's very difficult to survive strict scrutiny, it may be desirable to look closely at the strict scrutiny analysis. It might be tricky to defend a program in the alternative, but we might want to argue as a fallback that the program withstands strict scrutiny. And second, and perhaps more importantly, how one might structure the program could be somewhat different if we're comfortable that there's a good argument that the program withstands strict scrutiny. In particular, employing overt race and gender classifications may have a greater impact on the number of successful women and minority applicants. And I think Jason will look at the second question.
Right, and that question is the interest that would be advanced by full file review. The Subcommittee on Constitutional Issues in the reports that it's issued in the past have already identified several interests that could be advanced by full file review, such as promoting diversity, promoting competition, administrative efficiency, and remedying past discrimination. And the full committee as a whole, as well as the commission, could also add to that list of interests that could be advanced. In evaluating these interests, we should consider whether, by prioritizing certain interests in the design and presentation of full file review, we can minimize the program's vulnerability to a constitutional challenge. Prioritizing interests, of course, is tricky because we have to do so in balancing two competing considerations. On the one hand, we want FFR, as we've been referring to it shorthand, to promote a set of interests that are deeply connected to issues of race and gender, such as remedying past discrimination or promoting a sort of diverse viewpoint and diverse ownership. On the other hand, as Libby pointed out, we want and really need FFR to remain race and gender neutral so as to be subject to rational basis review. Part of the solution is to design a race and gender neutral program that focuses on applicants who have overcome disadvantage. But the other part of the solution needs to be not to undermine that race and gender neutrality by focusing and trying to use that race and gender neutral program to promote interests that are themselves race and gender neutral, or explicit. The program might ultimately advance those interests, but it would need to do so in a sort of contingent or indirect way. The criteria that would be used in evaluating applicants would need not to be keyed to directly addressing those interests. In designing the program, therefore, it may be helpful to say that full file review can directly advance interests that are themselves race and gender neutral, such as competition or racially neutral viewpoint diversity, but that it should focus on only indirectly advancing interests that are race or gender specific, such as remediation of discrimination or viewpoint diversity based on gender or race. We should also consider how our stated interests would affect the legal analysis in a constitutional challenge. As Libby pointed out, the interests are relevant to the applicable standards. If the court found that the program is race or gender neutral, it would apply rational basis review. And fortunately, this is a fairly easy standard to meet. The court would essentially look to see whether there is a rational basis between the program and the interests that it seeks to advance, and those interests would need to be legitimate government interests. The interests that have already been identified would qualify as legitimate government interests, and it's easy to articulate a rational relationship between how the program might look and what those interests are. On the other hand, if the court finds that the program is race conscious, it will apply strict scrutiny, which would require the program to be narrowly tailored to serve compelling government interests, and those are both terms of art. This is an extremely high standard. Most programs, in fact, do not survive it, and the full file review would face three particular challenges. The first one is that most of the interests that have been identified so far have not been recognized by the courts as being compelling government interests. And it's unlikely, based on our review of the case law so far, that such interests would be found to be compelling in the future. The second concern is that remedying past discrimination, for example, has been held in the past to be a compelling government interest. But this narrow tailoring requirement is very onerous. One of the reasons that you're undertaking the Adarand studies is to try to address that for the proposed SDB program that full file review would be the interim measure for. And in fact, to try to narrowly tailor full file review to meet that requirement might eliminate the benefits of using full file review as an interim measure. Finally, it's unclear exactly how a court would handle the interest of viewpoint diversity. On the one hand, cases in the college admissions context and even in broadcasting context suggest that courts might be open to an argument that viewpoint diversity in the broadcasting context is a compelling government interest, and they might be willing to sort of push the envelope and go there. On the other hand, they would only go there in the context of broadcasting. In the context of non-broadcasting licensing, viewpoint is much less relevant, if relevant at all. And it would be hard to argue that full file review is narrowly tailored to promoting viewpoint diversity in the non-broadcasting context. And so if full file review were to be applied in the non-broadcasting context, it would need to rely on another interest that would be identified as compelling by the court in order to survive a constitutional challenge. Those are the interest-related points we wanted to make, and now we turn to John for other issues.
Yeah, I just wanted to say two things about what you've heard so far. I know it's sobering. It was sobering to us as we went into it. One is that I think one of the distinctive features of full file review is that it is individualized. They're not presumptions. There has to be an examination of the qualifications of a particular individual. And I think as we try to draft a program that works and that survives, we need to take that point, because that's a strength of full file review. The other point is that the Constitutional Issues Committee has stressed, and Jason mentioned this, that in some sense, this is an interim step until we can get to the point of a social and economic disadvantaged business plan, which depends on the Adirond studies, which Thomas Reed has told us that we're going to rev up on. So, which would be a better long-term solution, but we have to get there. So, what can we do in the meantime? So, I think it's important to take those 2 points in mind. This is not the cure-all. This is something that we do to make progress in the meantime. The third question that was asked was, could an applicant who fails to win an authorization because a party, because of an FFR party sustained a claim that the commission has injured him by changing the rules after he has invested time and effort to seek the authorization under an earlier set of rules? We won't get into the details on that. We feel reasonably confident that the program could be designed either based on the existing commission procedures or some innovative ideas that David's committee has come up with, so that you won't be changing the rules in the middle of the game, and there should not be a meaningful risk of a complaint of this kind that would succeed. Again, we can go into it in greater detail, but probably one good news in the bottom line. And then the fourth question we were asked was, who will decide FFR eligibility and under what metrics or criteria? The extent of the disadvantage, its remoteness in time, the nexus to media telecom of the disadvantage that was overcome, and the weight of this factor relative to other factors. So the first question, who is to decide? There are a number of possibilities there. Based on the experience I've had, I'm concerned that the ALJ process could be very long, drawn out, very cumbersome, frankly, very lawyer-oriented. But David's had a very good suggestion that we sit down with Chief Judge Sipple and explore, get his ideas. Another idea would be a cadre of FCC officials for whom this would be a responsibility. And here, too, I think it would be wise to work closely with the FCC to determine what it would think would be possible, how it might be set up. There are a few precedents that are not terribly on point that might be used. In terms of the standards that would be used, they would probably relate to the purposes of the program. There's no sense in designing a program to get somewhere and then use criteria that doesn't get where you want to go. And I think the questions could be quite complicated. The Commission has, in a number of places, Barbara knows very well, a totality of the circumstances test. And it could be that rather than having some rigid compartments, that you'd look at the overall picture so that somebody was particularly strong in one area of qualifications, that might make up for maybe a smaller qualification in another compartment. But the Commission has a lot of expertise in this area, and I think it would be desirable to work constructively with the staff. And that leads us to question 5.
Which is whether FFR premised on the overcoming of disadvantages would tend to benefit minorities and women. And I think the short answer to that is sort of similar to John's answer to the fourth question, which is just that it will sort of largely depend on the specifics of how the program is set up and implemented and what metrics we use, and until we pin down what the goals of the program are, it doesn't really make sense to pin ourselves to specific metrics. But more generally, just to circle back to something I mentioned in response to the first question, we should think about whether this is even the right question to ask in terms of the constitutional defensibility of the program. There might, as mentioned, there might be an important distinction between a decision maker that's motivated by racial preference and a decision maker that's simply considering a rule's effect on minorities and women in terms of the level of scrutiny that the program's likely to receive. So we should be mindful of that distinction in how we discuss the program, and also while it certainly would be appropriate to consider how a rule will impact women and minorities, we should also think about how the program will advance other non-race and gender-based policy objectives that we may wish to argue constitute legitimate governmental interests that the program furthers. Thank you.
Just to sum up, our preliminary conclusion is that the FFR idea warrants energetic follow-up. It has promise. It has some challenges. But we're hopeful that those could be worked through. One of the basic challenges, as we've cited the theme, is that in a way we have two choices. One is going very aggressively for the goals and risking court overturning it, or to be more cautious, get something through, and then you wonder whether you've gotten enough. So it calls for a very careful striking of the balance, and from our point of view, we think that's got to involve the commission, so the commission gets vested in this approach. We do think it is possible. We do think it's possible to strike the right balance, and we do think that there are structural, process, procedural, practical issues that we need to be worked through, and they're not irrelevant to the constitutional analysis. So unfortunately, this presentation doesn't lend itself to a lot of bright lines, but we hope that is not discouraging.
Thank you very much. I wanted to just first respond for the subcommittee with a quick note of definition and a couple of very short questions. This is a wonderful presentation. We're so thankful for it. There is a case, Parents Involved, that was decided 3 years ago by the Supreme Court 5-4 with Justice Kennedy writing the opinion. One of the things Justice Kennedy said was that a race-conscious initiative by government is a last resort, that a government actor must, in effect, attempt essentially all race-neutral initiatives first, assuming that there is a compelling governmental interest for them, before it can turn to race-conscious measures. And therefore, while you've heard reference to, in our reports and in the discussion today, full file review as being perhaps an interim step, that's true, but it's also one that the subcommittee is trying to design as a potentially permanent rather than just an interim initiative, in that while the disparities, especially in ownership, seem so vast and intractable that it seems, as a practical matter, quite likely that it may be necessary to ultimately turn to race-conscious initiatives to bridge those gaps. Objectively, we don't know that until we've undertaken and attempted in good faith race-neutral measures. So we undertook to design this as a race-neutral measure, going to whether an individual has overcome disadvantages of whatever sort, the overcoming of which is predictive of success in the regulated industries. So this leads to kind of the first of two quick questions that I wanted to throw out for you, which is that is it accurate to say, in effect, that this program, although it is designed to be race neutral, it might be prudent to see, in case a court erroneously construes it as race conscious, that it is able to be defended on that basis? And if so, what is in fact the argument that we have to be respectful of, that notwithstanding our best efforts to design it as race neutral, it might be construed to be race conscious?
Well, Libby actually did talk a little bit about that. We think it is desirable to approach this and design it as a way where you'd have a fallback under the compelling government interest, narrowly defined. And the challenge is that some of the way you would argue it under a rational basis might not be the best way you would argue it when it came to the compelling government interest and narrowly defined. And I don't think, at least I can't tell you exactly what that formula would be, but that clearly would be the goal. The goal would be to have as a fallback that you have to meet the tougher standard, which means you'd have to weave into the argument some kind of analysis along lines that Jason talked about, where you try to make these interests into compelling interests or put them on the best foot forward.
And the other question, I guess, goes to something.
Let me say that I thought the question was better than the answer.
Oh, what's the court's answer that we'll know that for sure. The other question, very briefly, Jason, you spoke of, which is that the justification for a program, whether it is compelling or not, that there were four that the subcommittee had spoken of: remediation, diversity, competition, and administrative efficiency. That competition, the idea that simply including more potential parties in the stream of communications, being able thus to monetize and take advantage of their entrepreneurial and managerial and creative skills, adds value from the standpoint of competition. And administrative efficiency, the idea that if we're going to give awards to those who have succeeded in overcoming disadvantages, that might be predictive of someone who will, if they're awarded Spectrum, for example, might actually build it out. So that's something we know the Commission cares a lot about, given past history, for completely different reasons. So the question is, though, competition and administrative efficiency have, I gathered, not been found by courts in the past to have been compelling governmental issues, as that term is used in equal protection jurisprudence. Do you think there would be difficulty with those being interests that would survive rational basis review?
No, I think both of those interests could survive rational basis review. There are actually some interesting, there's little case law that we've seen so far addressing the interest of competition with race-conscious state action. And so it's difficult to see exactly how that would work. I think the challenge there is being able to articulate a nexus, saying that something about a person's race is what is actually contributing to the competition. And that would be the difficulty under strict scrutiny. But under rational basis, I think that the rationale that you just articulated makes a lot of sense and would survive a rational basis review. For the administrative efficiency also, for the same reasons, the challenge with the strict scrutiny there is that in the past, courts have actually held explicitly that no, racial classifications don't work to advance that interest. And they just think that, well, agency efficiency is actually less of a value than equal protection. There are some distinctions between the cases where that was decided and the case that we would have here, where in that case they were using race as sort of a shortcut. Say, like prison inmates, for example, they would, rather than figuring out which ones are likely to sort of fight amongst themselves, they would just divide them up automatically on race. And so that was the sort of efficiency that they were gaining. And in this case, it's very different. The words are kind of the same, but what the agency would be going through would actually be sort of the opposite, where it's more difficult to sort of evaluate each candidate on an individual basis. And so for that reason, you might be able to say, no, this is different, and should get different treatment under strict scrutiny. But I think that certainly under the lower standard of rational basis, that the argument would work.
We've thought a little bit about those issues, and we think some of them might be articulated to make it even clearer that it was tied into rational basis. For example, instead of talking about administrative efficiency, you could say, we're getting the best applicant, we're getting the best licensee, because they've had to struggle against challenges and handicaps, and they've overcome them, or they've strengthened their muscles in trying to do so. And so it's a way of getting a really good applicant. So we think a lot can be done in that area to shape it. The challenge comes if you're shaping it for rational basis, and then have you shaped it in a way that makes it a little more difficult if you go to the compelling interest.
All right, well, thank you, David, and thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Jason and Libby and crew. We feel like we're in good hands. This is indeed very complicated, but if anyone can find their way through the thicket, we have a great deal of confidence that you're the right people to do it. So we very, very much appreciate your donating your time to this cause. So, okay, moving along now. Debbie, we appreciate you bringing your folks here to talk to us about minority trends in new media adoption. So the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Tony and Jamila for giving us the invitation to be here today. I'm delighted and honored to be a member of this committee, but also to be here today to introduce several members of my executive team. And the reason we're here is to give you some insight into research that we've done over the years that gives us insight into our viewers and the community we serve. For those of you that don't know, BET Networks is celebrating our 30th year this year. We've been around for 30 years. So we're excited about that. We also, in 2009, just had our best year in our 30-year history based on our ratings. Over the 30 years, we have our mission has been to provide content, entertainment content, news, information, and public affairs to our viewers. We started out as a basic cable network 30 years ago. Today we have 4 cable networks, BET, Centric, BET, Hip Hop, and Gospel. We're also in the digital internet arena. We're in the mobile business, and we're growing in terms of our global distribution. So I'm very proud of our 30-year history, and one of the reasons we've been successful is our ongoing desire to understand our audience and to serve our audience. So it gives me pleasure to introduce 2 members of my executive team who are going to do the heavy lifting today and give you the details of our research. First is Scott Mills, who's President and Chief Operating Officer of BET Networks, and with him is Matthew Barnhill, who's Senior Vice President of Research for BET Networks. In the audience, we also have Tom Reynolds, who has worked on this project and pursued our interest in expanding in the broadband area. So the topic we're going to talk about today is African American media consumption trends, and we're going to also give you the results of our African American segmentation study, which hopefully will give you an understanding of the various populations of the African American consumer as we see it. So with that, I will turn it over to Scott Mills.
Great, and we should go to the podium. Good afternoon, and thank you for having us. We are very pleased to be here. Thank you, Chairman. Sure. I'm going to introduce briefly the presentation that Matthew is about to walk you through and then share a couple of examples. As Deborah shared, at BET Networks, we're a data-driven shop. We look for information to help guide all of the key decisions that we make. And as a result of that, we make tremendous investments in research. And we are one of the leading institutions that have allocated resources to investment, to research in the African American community. Over the last 18 months or so, we've interviewed about 80,000 African Americans in the context of a variety of research studies that we've done. And there are 2 specifically today, 2 focuses of our research that we'd like to share today. The first are kind of key trends in African American media consumption. And the second, as Deborah shared, is an African American segmentation study that we've done. And what the deck that we're going to walk you through very quickly will do is it will highlight the key findings of these 2 pieces of research and then show you how we at BET Networks run our business based on these insights. So I'll let Matthew first share trends in media.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we want to start off by providing a little bit of a landscape in terms of African American media consumption. And what you see on the pie chart is the share of weekly media hours among African Americans. And what we see is about 2/3 of those weekly media hours are spent with accessing the internet as well as watching television. What we're going to do is do a little bit of a deeper dive on those two areas specifically. But one thing I also want to communicate is that with the pie that you see there, every year the pie gets a little bigger and bigger. And while you may see some of the percentages change slightly, it's important to remember that the pie still gets bigger. So TV viewership is increasing. The number of hours spent on the internet is increasing. So it's not a zero-sum game. There's a little bit of movement within the pie, but the pie is also getting larger. One of the things that we also know is that African Americans watch more television than other ethnicities across all demographic groups. If you go to the second set of bars where you see P2+, that stands for people 2+, or basically people above the age of 2. And African Americans spend a little bit over 6.5 hours per day watching television. That's 2.5 more hours than all others, and that represents a 63% difference. As you look across all demos, you'll notice that TV viewership is higher for African Americans, and where we see the highest difference is for people 25 to 54, and that gap is 72%. Where we see the smallest is with kids 2 to 11, and that gap is 29%, but it still represents an hour more of television being consumed by African American kids than kids of other ethnic descent. And we also know that African Americans watch TV every hour of the week at higher levels. This chart represents the percent of households using television, or HUTs. And what you'll see is a couple of points to take away here. First, African American viewership reaches its highest point between 9 and 10 p.m. weekdays. But if you look at the overnights, specifically on weekdays between 1 to 6 a.m., and then on weekends 2 to 8 a.m., African American HUTs, or households using television, is actually double that of other ethnicities. Okay, so we're watching a lot of TV, but where you see the biggest differences or the percentage increase really spike is in late night viewing. As we look at what is being viewed, I know that there has been a perception that African American viewing habits are becoming much more closer to that of the rest of America. And while that may be true on broadcast, it's not so on cable. So what you see here is actually the top 10 shows for calendar year 2009. And up top, you see broadcast broken out for whites and blacks. And you see American Idol, NCIS, Dancing with the Stars, and NCIS Los Angeles being among the top 10 shows among whites as well as blacks on broadcast. So that's 4 common shows. But when you look at what's going on cable, you see something completely different. There are no shows in common among the top 10. And if you look at the listing of the shows among blacks on cable, all of the shows are targeted towards African Americans, or they feature an African American lead. So there's much more of a search for content relevancy on the cable side for black consumers than you see on broadcast. Also, as we switch gears a little bit and talk about what we see on the internet side, we know that African American broadband adoption lags that rate that we see for the general population. And as we look at those communities that are not adopting, what we see is, a lot of these are the communities that would actually benefit greatly from having access to broadband, primarily being low-income African Americans, the older African American community, and those African Americans that are high school dropouts. And as we look at what the big challenges are, or the barriers to adopting broadband, What we see is, the lack of relevance being the number one reason, with price or being too expensive being close behind. So there definitely, as we talk about relevance, that definitely has to be a point that's driven home as we look to increase broadband adoption rates among the African American community. But what we also see is that those African Americans who do get online and they participate in what we call Web 2.0 activities, they're more active in a lot of areas than the general population. You see in terms of updating status on social networking sites, watching videos, using personal content sites like MyYahoo, listening to music, downloading, and even watching full television episodes on the internet are all done at higher levels for African Americans than for whites. One of the things we were asked to take a look at specifically is how news and public affairs information is consumed within the black community. And what we see is, first, African Americans watch less TV news overall. So whites typically are watching close to 3 hours of news each week, whereas blacks are watching a little bit over 2 hours. I'm sorry, that's all other ethnicities, not just whites. And then what we also see is that while African Americans are watching less TV news overall, what they are watching, they're more likely to watch local news and cable news versus morning news talk shows as well as broadcast national news. But where we think the big growth area is really around internet usage. You see there's a higher propensity to digest online news among African Americans, as well as to read current event and political blogs for African Americans than others. Conversely, what we also see is less or fewer African Americans reading newspapers on a daily perspective. So, there really is something around the growth in news and getting that information from the internet and being able to have access to it.
Great. So in an effort to try to bring to life then what would one do with these findings, we wanted to show you how we actually deploy them in our shop. So Matthew shared the data about African American television consumption, and what you saw that was in the cable space, that it was highly correlated with ethnically targeted shows. So what we do is we focus on BET on creating ethnically targeted programming, whether it's original series or whether it's specials or awards or late night talk shows, and that's how we serve that audience on our linear channel. In the online space, Matthew shared that while penetration levels lag the general population, those who are online are super focused on Web 2.0 activities, right? So a high degree of interactivity, video consumption, social networking. So our online executions are very focused on that audience segment. So we integrate social networking features. We have lots of online video, webisodes, user-generated content really speaking to that audience. And then in the third space is mobile. African Americans overall over-index in mobile. They over-index in smartphone consumption. And so our mobile executions are really tailored to that audience, whether it's with a mobile website, mobile video, mobile voting, integrating Twitter executions. And so the goal is to show how we both drive and serve the audience in ways that's consistent with these trends. So just to give you a perspective, Matthew shared that African Americans consume less news on television relative to the general population and more online. And so what we do is we use our television platform, recognizing that we have this huge audience aggregation there. We serve them with news information that works for that platform, briefs, weekly roundups, and features. And then we use those platforms to drive people to digital platforms where they have more robust experiences. So it's additional video, articles, blogs, additional resources. We provide interactive features, allow people to engage, share, distribute, comment on their content, distribute across their social networking platforms, and link to related sources. So what we feel like is we're meeting that audience where it lives, giving it what it wants on linear television, and then supporting it in the digital space. We also talked about Web 2.0 activities as video consumption. African Americans consume more video online than the general population. So we take all of our original programming, we deploy it online, we deploy music videos online, but we've gone one step further. We've found that there's so much demand online that we actually deploy web-only content online tailored specifically to our audience, and then use all of our other platforms to drive the audience there. So we're seeing a lot of traction around this because there's so much demand for web-only video content. And then the other piece is, you may have heard that African Americans over-index on Twitter. It is in fact true. There's a question of cause and effect. We think we BET Networks got in front of this very, very early. We integrated Twitter in kind of 2 of our signature live shows. In 106 in Park, we allow our audience to influence the show, to interact with guests, and to actually control some of the dialogue that's happening both on air as well as driving trending topics on Twitter by integrating them into 106 in Park on a daily basis. And then in the BET Awards show last year, which was the #1 award show on cable, we integrated Twitter executions throughout the pre-show, in the show, and again allowed people to feel like they were being heard, engaging with a piece of content that they really enjoyed. And the last kind of example of an execution that we wanted to share is what we'll be doing leading up to the BET Awards later this month. And that is, we're really harnessing not just a single digital element. It's not just Twitter or friending or voting or user-generated content. We've really focused on the fact that we've now gotten to this space where we have this concept of almost digital energy, right? There's so much digital activity happening out there. It's almost as if there's digital energy. And so we've created this execution in partnership with AOL, where around 4 kind of very digital-friendly artists, Justin Bieber, Trey Songz, a couple of other extraordinarily digital-friendly artists, will have a competition for their fan bases to see which ones generate the most digital activity across all platforms, across Facebook, across Twitter, across BET.com, across AOL. Which ones can generate the most digital activity such that we can actually conclude that they have the most rabid digital fans in the world. And then we'll reward that artist in the show. So we're doing all these things to show how we're trying to meet and drive our audience where they live. They love linear television. They love interactivity. We bring these 2 things together in creative ways to kind of improve the overall experience. And the last slide here before we go to audience segmentation speaks to the fact that we think our natural programming and marketing activity aggressively drives broadband adoption among the African American community that we call natural adopters, people who kind of are naturally disposed to interacting and moving into that space. But the data that Matthew shared a little earlier showed that there are particular subsegments of the community that are really lagging in adoption: low income, high school dropouts, and the elderly. And we, in recognizing the fact that our kind of organic activity is not likely to move that community, we entered into a partnership with the Joint Center, Mr. Everett and his colleagues, with the Urban League and a number of other organizations to build a public-private partnership to try to drive broadband adoption among these most vulnerable African American communities. With that, I'll turn it back to Matthew, who will briefly share this audience segmentation piece.
One of the things that we've heard time and time again is that many individuals choose to think of the African American population as monolithic. And as we started looking at the global spending power of the African American community and started looking at how that compares to spending power or GDPs of countries, we saw that we actually had a pretty big chunk of spending power. And we would end up ranking number 13 globally, just around the countries of Mexico, Italy, and Australia. So if you start thinking about, one segment of our community basically having that or wielding that much power, there is a huge opportunity to help everyone understand that everyone in the African American community is not necessarily interested in the same type of content, or they're not necessarily interested in the same type of activities, et cetera. So one of the things that we undertook was an audience segmentation model study. And what we did was we worked with a supplier who has expertise in this, and we put together a study of about 2,400 African Americans between the ages of 14 to 55. And what we did was asked a number of questions, and through a multivariate clustering technique, we were able to identify 7 very distinct segments among the African American 14 to 55-year-old population. And I'm just going to walk you through what those segments are. The first group is what we call strivers, and they represent the largest segment, a little over a third of the 14 to 55-year-old population. And basically, these are opinion leaders who are adventurous, fashionable, and they're focused on achievement at work. They're just starting to get to the point where they have enough money to have fun while they're working hard, and they're going to be in their mid to late 20s through early 40s. The next group we have, we call conscious sisters, and there are definitely men in this group as well, so don't get thrown by the nomenclature. But these are going to be African American parents who are a little more conservative. They're very conscious of the culture and are really focused on sharing life lessons with their kids. They're going to be in their 30s and 40s, and they represent about 22% of the 14 to 55-year-old pop. The next group is our tech-fluentials, and these are going to be individuals in their 20s to mid-30s who are tech proficient, but what distinguishes them also is that they're very culturally aware. They're very keen on learning new things, exploring the world, and being active in their communities. And then we have our Bright Horizons. These are your average students who are education and civic oriented, but they also want to have fun and be up on the latest and greatest. This group, more than any other segment, has been influenced by the election of President Obama because they now believe that they can do anything that they put their mind to. And they are in their teens and early 20s, and they represent about 10% of the 14 to 55-year-old pop. The next group we have is our urban dreamers, and these are basically the individuals who are they're the life of the party. They want to have as much fun as possible. They're in their 20s, and they represent about 7% of our pop. We have inner circle elites who are working adults who are very rich in heritage, and they really have a focus on what their legacy or leave behind is going to be. And they tend to be in their late 40s and older, and they represent about 9% of the pop. And then finally, we have our survivors, and these are teens and young adult males who have decided that they're focusing on achievement and they definitely want to make it, but for whatever reason, they've decided that school is not necessarily their thing, their path, and they're pursuing, other career opportunities. And they're in their late teens and 20s, and they represent about 2% of the population. So, we obviously have much more around each of these segments, including media habits, favorite genres, spending power, et cetera. But one of the things that we're really trying to do is to help people understand the differences within the African American community as it relates to different segments, and understand that we are not a monolithic community, and we have very diverse interests and information needs. So that's it. Questions?
Thank you very much. We have time for one or two questions if there are any questions. Karen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a question because one of the comments was that on the slide that showed broadcast versus cable, that on cable, right, that they were on cable that African Americans were searching for more relevant content. And I'm wondering the degree to which it's just that on cable there's more choices that actually target African Americans as opposed to network, which is still a little behind in creating the kind of diversity that maybe we'd all like to see, particularly in shows that would focus on minority characters as opposed to just have minorities as part of an ensemble cast.
Well, certainly that the availability is an issue, but if you look at the thousands upon thousands upon thousands of shows that are available on the 800-plus channels, what you see is the top 10 shows still are African American focused. So, I think there's a little bit of give and take there.
Other questions?
There's one behind you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, yes, please.
Mr. Miller, slide 6, I think I'm going to piggyback on Karen's question. You speak again about relevance.
Can you come to the table?
Slide 6, you talked about relevance. And I was just curious, could you define relevance? Is it beyond just ethnicity? Is it more of interest in programming that is empowering or just entertainment? Could you help me understand relevance?
So the measure of relevance here is really a function of how the question was asked across the 3 different surveys. And specifically, when they asked people who were non-adopters why they weren't adopting, they tried to identify the barriers to adoption. What a lot of people cited was that it was not sufficiently important to them. They didn't have a sufficiently high level of interest. There didn't appear to be enough there for them. So it was really what we call a demand side problem for a lot of people, where they simply said it hadn't yet achieved the prominence and importance in their life where they were going to adopt it. But so the answer is it's really a function of how the question was posed across the 3 discrete studies.
Can one make an assumption that the relevance question could be, in terms of interest, the programming that in fact empowers versus entertains?
I don't think you could infer that. I think what one could say is, and in fact, BET and the Joint Center are working on a joint white paper, to specifically get greater insight into this issue, because it is one that inspires everybody to superimpose their own perspectives. And so what instead it appears to be, it's a couple of things. Number one is it's not even clear if the primary impediment is what is in fact available today, as much as it is whether what's available on broadband today is known and is being made aware to these particular communities. So that's a threshold question before you even get to, well, what is there? And so, we always use ourselves as an example. When 10 years ago, when we were launching our website, there was all this discussion around, was it premature to try to serve the African American community this way? And our point was, it's not just the creation of our website that's going to drive African Americans. It's going to be the fact that there'll be a lot more discussion, a lot more marketing, a lot more focused communication with African Americans around the internet. So we think part of the relevance issue isn't just about changing the content or applications that are available, but in fact, for these targeted communities, making sure that they're aware of what is available to them and how it could positively impact their lives.
But I would just add, from our perspective, and what we see happening in broadband, we think it's going to be quite a bit of opportunity to entertain and inform, and to allow our community especially to do deeper dives in areas that might be of importance to them, whether it's health, whether it's education, the kind of things that you can't normally do on a 24-hour network because you're trying to appeal to as many people as possible. So if you have a health issue related to lupus and you want information about that, broadband is the perfect way to get that information to you and to create programming that, for lack of a better phrase, is a niche of a niche. Sure. So, we look at it as an opportunity to provide those type of services to our community that they continue to look for, that don't necessarily lend themselves to TV. So I don't know if that was where you were going with it, but...
It is.
Okay.
That's where I'm heading. Thank you, Joe.
Great.
You're welcome, Steve. All right, well, thank you very much, Matthew and Scott. We appreciate that very informative report, and thank you, Debbie, for bringing them, and Tony for making those arrangements. And we really enjoyed that. I hope we see you again. So, Karen, did you want to introduce the final
Yes,
report
thank
here?
you.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to introduce Laura Eford. She's a vice president of Zero Divide, which is a nonprofit organization that was actually formed out of a merger long ago of Pacific Bell and the old AT&T. So it was funded by money that came out of that. And she and the foundation have focused a lot on trying to make sure that community-based organizations and organizers understand the importance of broadband and technology, and has been one of the few organizations in that space. They focus on California.
She herself was legislative director to the legendary Patsy Mink and was in the Clinton White House where she worked with outreach to communities, so she's well situated in this space. And Laura's going to talk about Asian Americans and the little research that's out there on that.
Welcome, Laura. We're glad you're here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Have a slideshow presentation. Let's see if it just... There we go. Okay, good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. As Karen said, Zero Divide is an organization that's been around for 10 years working on technology adoption in underserved communities, particularly in California. I'm here today to talk specifically about the Asian American and Pacific Islander community because there's basically lack of information about this particular community. Zero Divide has worked with about 54 programs covering the state of California, specifically around technology adoption in underserved communities, in Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. So this information is based on our experience in the last 10 years with those particular programs. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the community itself. There's about 16.6 million Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the United States. It makes up about 5.4 of the U.S. population. You can see on the chart here, our populations are concentrated among several states. That actually is a factor that contributes to the issues I'm going to discuss today. But most people think about the West Coast as a large where the large portions of the population are, but you'll see, in fact, the other states in the South, in the Midwest, and in the East also have large populations. The key thing about the Asian American and Pacific Islander community is this population is grouped together because they originate from a certain part of the world, but really it's a very diverse community, and there are a few things that really are constant throughout all the communities. They represent people whose origins are from over 30 countries, ethnic groups speaking over 100 languages. So there's no common element like a common language, as with some other ethnic communities. Nearly 2/3 of AAPIs are foreign-born, so it's a community that's intensively an immigrant community, and we're a fast-growing community. So it's a very young community in the United States, primarily growing because of immigration. You'd be interested to know that the second highest country of people that immigrate here, second to Mexico, is actually the Philippines. So a large number of folks coming from the Asian and Pacific Islands to the U.S. By 2050, the AAPI population is expected to increase to about 40.6 million people, to be almost 10%, just under 10% at 9.2% of the population. One of the most difficult things about this population is it's diverse, not only in terms of the languages it speaks, in terms of the experiences people have, whether they're first generation, new immigrants, whether they're fourth, fifth, or sixth generation here in the United States, but also diversity in terms of things like their poverty levels. Overall, Asian Americans have a poverty level, those living below poverty is about 12.6%, but if you were to look at specific subgroups like the Hmong community at 37.8%, or the Laotian community, sorry, there's a little typo there, at I think they're at 29.3%. Looks like I missed a group, but anyway, you get the picture. That when you look, and what happens is when you look at the communities in aggregate, it masks a lot of the issues. When you look at the population in aggregate, it masks a lot of these issues. This slide just talks a little bit about the specific cities with the highest populations of Asian Americans. So the central problem in really dissecting what what are Asian Pacific Islanders doing on broadband? Are they adopting broadband at high rates? The central problem is really one of the diversity of our community, combined with the fact that we're a fairly small community nationally, and that we're concentrated in certain states. So we're not equally dispersed throughout the country. So when people look at trying to get data about Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, it's very hard to get an accurate picture. And what happens is we're either left out of the studies because there's not enough of a sample of respondents to a survey, or it's too expensive to actually cover the communities, or the study is done nationwide, and so it doesn't look at the specific areas that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are heavily concentrated, but looks at the nation as a whole and reports the number of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, or reports the data in an aggregate form, which then leads to misleading data. Let's take a look at some of this. I just did a quick scan of Pew Research. Everybody probably knows about the Pew Center for the Internet and all of the wonderful research that they do around Internet access, the digital divide, broadband, our use of the Internet. And these were 4 recent studies. None of them cover Asian Americans or Pacific Islanders. Not at all, no mention. It talks about African American population, Hispanic population, white, but nothing about Asian Americans. So this is an example of how we just simply get left out of the picture. This is from the FCC's own working paper, and acknowledging the fact that Asian Americans are not included in the study for the very reason I cited, which was the sample was too small. Another problem that happens is most of the surveys that are done in English only, and a high percentage of our population doesn't speak English as its first language, or continues to speak their home language, or they're new to the country. So without asking the questions or the surveys or doing the research in their home language, you miss a whole part of the population of the community. There are studies that have included the Asian American or Pacific Islander population. This is one done by the NTIA. You'll note that it is reported, and it's reported that our broadband use is very high. But again, the problem with that is that it doesn't take into consideration the differences between the subgroups of the Asian American population. And as a result, there is this perception that Asian Americans were all connected, not a problem, don't need to do any kind of work in terms of broadband adoption. This is just another example of a study done in California where Asian Americans have a high population, but yet again, data was only reported in aggregate. And so we don't really get a good picture of what's happening to the immigrant population, the low-income population, the specific subgroups by ethnicities in terms of their adoption of broadband. So really, in our work, what we've discovered is that the digital divide is really a manifestation of the social, cultural, economic divides that happen in our country. And in fact, a study that was done by Cal State University, Los Angeles, what they found was as they mapped out internet and broadband access throughout the state, that it really mapped the lack of access to the internet or lack of adoption as well, really mapped the same other concerns that people have in terms of not having access to educational opportunities or to jobs and economic opportunities. And so what we found that really to address the barriers to adoption, specifically in the Asian American and Pacific Islander community, but also in a lot of other underserved communities, there's several key factors of what the barriers are. One is access. Many communities still actually do not have access to affordable broadband. Again, the issue of relevancy comes up. This was brought up by the BET presenters as well. Particularly for the Asian American Pacific Islander community, relevancy has to do with issues that they're concerned about. It has to do with content that's in language. It has to do with services that are specifically directed towards them. Content and applications also. Again, and language issues for this particular community, and that lack of training and technical support. And for many communities, privacy and security concerns are actually a deterrent to broadband adoption as well. So what works? In the Asian Pacific Islander community, as well as some of the underserved communities we've worked with, these are the 5 points we found that really help drive broadband adoption in this community. One is a targeted approach. It really is working with those communities, their specific needs. The barriers are so diverse depending on the community. You really have to have a targeted approach. The second, again, is the proliferation of relevant content and applications. And here I would say what we found the most success with is actually having the consumer or the person become the content producer themselves. When they become a content producer, it really ignites their interest to engage in the internet and broadband, because they can not only put their content up there, but then they can see what other people are doing and connect with others through this medium. Working with trusted community institutions. These are folks that work in this community every day, whether they're health clinics or social service organizations, after-school programs. They're working in the AAPI community or other communities every day, and it really is connecting with them and actually building their capacity around broadband to then have them help the population build their capacity really is key, and I'll talk about that a little bit more also. And also having technology access really be a part of the overall ecosystem for a community. So it really becomes part of the goal of creating better healthcare, job opportunities, all of those kinds of things go together. And then it's supporting sustainability. So making sure that these programs can continue over time. I think what we found, having been started in the late 90s, that when sort of the furor of the attention to the digital divide collapsed, in the mid 2000s, we saw all these programs go away, and there was no sustainability. So communities who had been making progress around technology adoption, all of a sudden, funding wasn't there to support those programs, and as a result, they've been left behind. We did have one organization in the mid-2000s, about 2004, really try to take a look at a much deeper level of what was happening in the AAPI community. And they looked at the community-based organizations that were serving this community and really found some staggering statistics. Again, this was a few years ago. The study has not been redone, but it gives you a sense that that the community-based organizations, who are often the key link to these populations, are struggling with their technology access as well. You'll see here they didn't have 57 had no computer access for their clients. 31%, I'm sure this number has gone down, but at the time 31%, there was a lack of broadband or high-speed internet access. So supporting those institutions is a major way, I think, to really penetrate this community. Just want to give a couple of examples here. The Little Tokyo Service Center is a social service agency in the heart of Los Angeles. And we've been funding them probably for, well, you can see here, for almost 10 years. And what we found is there really is a continuum or a logic to broadband adoption and technology adoption in a community. And you see here we started 10 years ago when it was really about basic technology, learning how to use a computer in the language that the people spoke, focusing on seniors because that was the community who had the least amount of knowledge about technology. And then in 2002 and 2004, again, going into this whole idea of content production, that you actually could produce content yourself and distribute it via the internet. And this was a key way of getting, in this community, the Japanese American seniors focused on addressing or using the internet and broadband, because they found that they could tell their stories. They had great projects about those who had been interned and actually creating digital stories about their experiences there. And then this particular organization really realized that in order to create the kind of infrastructure they needed in their community to promote broadband access, that they really needed to create their own wireless network. Oops, sorry. And so that's what they did. They created a wireless network throughout this maybe a 10-block radius in Little Tokyo, Los Angeles, and it's free to anyone who wants to use it outdoors. And then they started working on actually providing the access indoors to many of the housing units, low-income housing units that they provide. So you see there's free outdoor wireless. As of, I think this was about 2 years ago, they had 150 homes connected to broadband and over 176 daily users. So they took their access into their own hands and created this infrastructure for the community. The next step for them that we've been working with them on is really trying to address that sustainability issue. So could they actually become an ISP that charged for internet services for some of the higher income residents of this community and the businesses in this community to sustain the free and low-cost internet service to the lower income individuals. The other example I want to talk about is Filipino Advocates for Justice. And I put them here because we often talk about access to broadband, but for what purpose? And this is an advocacy organization. They work on civil rights issues for Filipino Americans. And I think the reason why I wanted to talk a little bit about them is what broadband and access to broadband in their community has done for them is really be able to increase their impact and effectiveness. They've gone from doing outreach to, say, several hundred people to really being able to access 300,000 plus people, not just in California, but nationwide. Their policy impact that they've been working on changed from just local impact, working on local issues, to national issues and really affecting legislation that was happening in Congress. They've used the new media technologies, tapping into youth for the fresh content on YouTube and blogs, and they've really become active users of the internet and have seen how broadband has actually impacted their advocacy work. So the recommendations I want to make today. The first is we really need to conduct studies which disaggregate the AAPI population to attain what the accurate state of broadband adoption is in this community. A lot of the data that we do have focus on Asian Americans in the aggregate, even less data available for Pacific Islander communities. So we have very little data on what those communities, how those communities engage with broadband. We need to conduct studies that use other languages so we can get a clear picture of those in those populations that don't speak English and what their use of broadband is. We need to support adoption programs targeted specifically to the Asian American and Pacific Islander populations, particularly the immigrants, those who are limited English proficient, and specific subpopulations that tend to suffer more from economic and educational disadvantages. Finally, my last recommendation is really to invest in the technology capacity of organizations, community-based organizations serving this population, because they are the ones that deal with the AAPI population every day. Oftentimes it's the first point of reference for a new immigrant family coming into the country, learning what our systems are, how to connect to technology. And so by building their capacity, I think we will in turn build the broadband capacity of this population. Thank you very much.
Thank you. See, are there any questions, Diane?
One question. In your early slide on page 4, you mentioned the population expectation by 2050. I wonder if you had a current number?
The current population is in the first slide, which is
where was it?
16.5, I believe, is the current. Right on. It's the header.
Oh, there it is. Great.
16.6.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tony?
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you very much for your presentation, and that our subcommittee will take up your request for a recommendation.
I'm about to ask you to do that. That'd be great.
Because certainly there clearly needs to be more information, and we'll take that up right away.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Very nice job. All right, we're just about to the witching hour here, and I just wanted to say that we will meet again in September. We've got about 6 months left of this iteration of the committee, and I don't know what the chairman's intentions are with regard to rechartering it, but I suppose those will, he will make those known sooner rather than later. Jeffrey, did you have something?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for interrupting our agenda this way, but when the call for the question came on the Arbitron PPM recommendation, it did not include the option of an abstention, and I would like the record to reflect my vote as an abstention, please.
All right, not a problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there anything else to come before this august body? No? Well, then we'll let you go, and thank you very, very much for coming. We'll see you in September.
Thank you.